And there we are.
And we're
So
live. Welcome back,
I'm
everybody.
glad that
Welcome back.
yeah.
Um, we wanted to let everybody know that we're coming back. The other day, we said we'd come back today, and we have a guest with us today. A very special guest with a lot of knowledge and a lot of experiences in what our topic is today.
Yeah.
Um, First off, once you like, share, go on the YouTube, like and share, whatever. Subscribe. I guess that's how the YouTubes work. But anyways, Widener, you got anything to say before we introduce our guest?
No, I just no, I'm just interested to see what she has to say, and she's gonna sprinkle us with her knowledge on kind of what this whole podcast is about. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, we're just kind of interested on why the Native Americans are overlooked in their just situations in general, I think. So, you know,
Okay.
the reason that we started this whole podcast was because of our brother Hill, and he lived in Window Rock, Arizona. I believe that's what it was. And why do you think people don't talk about this? Why do you think people don't talk about the natives as they should be talked about? What is it? Why do you think it's almost a forgotten thing? You know?
Yeah. Well, Hallie, would you like to
Yes.
introduce yourself? Kind of tell us a little bit about you and what you do and everything.
Yes.
Yeah. What do
I
you do?
promise I'm not distracted. It's just I've never done the video. So first off, Aneen, Hallie and Dishnakaz, Nimki Dodam, Bawating and Dunjaba. So first off, let me introduce myself. That was me saying hello. My name's Hallie. I am ThunderClan, and I come from the place of the Rapids in my language of Ojibwe. I am a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians located in the Upper Peninsula of Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. So we're like a hand and we're somewhere up north. Professionally, I am a community outreach support for tribal communities in my state. I work for a tribal coalition that works in response to systems, communities, anything that impacts or anyone who comes into contact with survivors of domestic sexual assault, stalking, anything of that nature. So we respond to the disproportionate rates of violence in our communities. Personally, I grew up here in my tribal community since 1996. My sons are both tribal. I have a son that goes to a tribal school. And I just both professionally and personally have experience in this area. So does that do okay, gentlemen?
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
Sounds good to
so I
me.
think my first question is why do we not hear more about this stuff in the Native community? Why do we not hear about the suicides and stuff like that? Why is that not talked about?
We are so invisible as a people. I do want to disclaim, and maybe because there will be those watching this in and out, so I may say it more than once. I can't speak for all Native populations. I can't speak for all tribes in America. I'm not representing any one nation, any one tribe. I'm speaking from my own experience and my knowledge and expertise in this field. I think I didn't realize how invisible we were until I started traveling as an adult. And you get in conversation, and I travel often for work for various reasons across the United States. And talking to my seatmates, talking to a stranger at a deli, just sharing casualties that may be brought up. I may be wearing my beaded jewelry or my little necklace of copper, and someone will ask, oh, where did you get that? Is that costume jewelry? Or where did you find Native American relic? And I'll explain I'm Native American. I actually live in a tribal community. We still exist. And they'll say, what? Like, do you guys ride horses? Do you live in teepees? And no, I drive a Nissan. No, a Saturn. I have electricity. My people didn't ever live in teepees. My people actually lived in wigwams. That is our traditional housing. There are different forms of shelter that bands have, from longhouses to peblos, to teepees. Horses were not indigenous to the United States. So when I moved at 10 years old from a big city in California here to Michigan, what a shock that was to learn in history class. I went to a tribal elementary school, and we had culture and language class. And one of the first realizations of what mainstream society or media and history has perpetrated is we are savage, we are merciless, we are uncontainable. I mean, all these just negative stereotypes that have been reinforced because the U.S. government needs to come out and apologize to how they've treated their indigenous people from the very beginning. It's just, no one wants to hear about it. We turn our eyes every time. Oftentimes, when there is a person of color in the media for one form of victimship or another, they are actually torn up. They're torn up on social media, in mainstream media, in different platforms, because we assume they were thugs. We assume because they came from the hood or a reservation or some, impoverished area, that these brown boys, these baby mamas are all perpetrating this game. That's not true. We're surviving what our environment has given us. We are surviving the little reality that we were given, this little swamp up here in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, off Shunk Road, to exist as Native people. We have been cut off on the mainstream level. We have our men who are dying by suicide at higher rates than any other racial or ethnic demographic within the United States.
But
Native Americans?
no, so
Yeah.
with you saying that, like, why do they have the resources to go and like talk, or do they have the resources? That's what I'm getting at. And why are they not utilizing the resources?
Well, there's a few. Again, I'm clarifying before I upset or offend anyone. I'm speaking from my knowledge and my experience. So there are different ways, just to give you an understanding. My reservation's not, we have paved roads. We have sidewalks now. We have heat, we have water, we have homes. I mean, we are okay and as far as shelter goes, okay? But there are other tribes within my state that are maybe 30 miles away to 300 miles away, and maybe their community doesn't look like my community, right? So it's based off land disposition. It's based off opportunity to be a formed sovereign tribal government, federally recognized by the United States government and Congress. It factors into, do you have people who know how to write grants? Are you living in a resourceful, booming area where you can build different enterprises, whether it be a casino, which is a huge stereotype, but yes, we are sovereign. We are allowed to financially sustain ourselves. Any type of profit that tribes can do to sustain themselves is great. But the reality is we are still dependent on grants. And a lot of tribal communities across the United States have access to Indian health services. Now, how that looks like outside of my community, I don't know. But I know that there is funding. There are rural grants. There are urban grants for Indigenous people, for mental health, physical, all different forms, traditional health. So yes, oftentimes a lot of tribes do have access to mental health services, but
why are they not using those resources? Like, why do you think they're not using those resources?
it's beyond that. It's beyond
Well,
not
I
using
mean,
or using those resources.
so it could be, and I'm not, saying that it's beyond that, but the whole reason this thing started was because we had a buddy that committed suicide, and I just don't know, is it like against them, I say, natives to reach out for help? Is that like what is happening? Why are they not doing that? Is it
Okay,
a pride
so
thing? Like,
you're no, it's opposite of pride. It's shame.
okay, so
Oftentimes. Again, I'm not making a shoe fits all for everybody.
sure,
We live in a mainstream society that don't allow men to express themselves.
okay,
We have this over machoism, and I'm not saying this as insult, but I've seen it. I've worked with a lot of perpetrators. I've worked with a lot of broken men. I did substance abuse before coming into the field of domestic and sexual assault. I worked at a men's treatment facility, and the brokenness and not having a safe space. And by the time that these broken men, and I'm not even, yes, Rashawn, you are, and I'm going to hit that point as well. It's culturally discouraged in some tribes as well. Again, I am from the north. I'm Ojibwe. I am not Dene. I am not from Cherokee Nation and or Muskogee Creek and all these other places. But Rashawn, if I'm pronouncing your name right, I agree with you, and I'll hit that point as well. But we are being raised in a society that overall with men, we don't comfort and support them in response that we should at this point, right? Another thing is we have so many different influences that we didn't even have 20 years ago coming into our teenage years or our adolescent years. We're seeing so many forms of violence just perpetrated 24/7. And I mean, there's so many factors, right? And I'm just talking on a societal. If we go into a tribal community, I have community elders who are still not comfortable sharing the trauma, so we don't talk about it. I grew up in a community where we had aunties, and I call them, and I'm not saying this with disrespect because my res auntie has my utmost respect, but we had, Nokomis and Mishomis. We had our grandmas and our papas and our aunties and our uncles. And a lot of aunties would say, like, if they knew there was a perpetrator in the family, let's say sexual assault, let's get away from uncle, right? Like, we don't want to address it, but we address it as our own. First and foremost, we were disenfranchised as people to begin with when a lot of our sovereignty and our rights were just stripped. Our identity was stripped. And so I'll touch on generational and historical trauma here in a little bit. Then you have, bands or tribes who respond like how I may respond in my region and in my faith or my belief, and how I've been taught and teachings that have been shared with me through elders and healers may look different in the Southwest tribal area. It may look different in the Pacific North West. It may look different in Michigan. It may look different in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan than it does in the lower region of Michigan. And so if it's culturally not supported because traditionally we had resources. At one point in time, tribes sustained for so long, and we lived off the land, and we had our creator, and we have Mother Earth, and we have all these natural resources, and we had our healing and our tradition. That's how it was dealt with. If you had a problem, I know historically in context to the Ojibwe people, we often relied on the elders. So a lot of tribes in my region, women were held almost as equals or in higher regard to men. So we provided the sustenance in our communities, our villages, and sometimes our women would hunt and gather, but oftentimes they would do the supporting roles in our community to position our young men to go and gather. They would be advisors. They would be, you know, those who sought out, I guess, government within their tribal framework. And so it's not one size fits all for everybody.
Sure.
If we talk about generational trauma, and we talk about the boarding school era, and we talk about 60s scoop, and we talk about lack of learning how to heal and lack of learning how to cope and nurture ourselves. And if I were ripped away by this cold institution from my mama or my grandma or my auntie or my father or my sister, and I'm no longer nourished as Hallie, this being, this Hallie, this fabric in our tribal community, because our youth are held in such a high regard next to our elders, and I'm no longer nurtured by my environment, by my family, by my community members, and I am now positioned in this cold, institutionalized setup for the next 12 years of my life. And if something happened, whether it was sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, spiritual abuse, cultural abuse was off the bat, because they cut our hair right away. We were, you know, whipped and beaten and exploited in so many different labor traffic. I mean, if you look at what these orphanages really did, is they exploited these young children and used them for their own gain. We were forced a religion that was never a concept in our life. We were taught that our belief in a higher power, which often is creator, was wrong. And so we were introduced, you know, Bibles to us. We were, a lot of bad things happen. Now, if you live, and again, this isn't every boarding school survivor. This isn't every person who has experienced trauma. But if you live in that state of mind and you become conditioned, and I want to go back, Justin, Gary, I don't know personally if you have children, but Justin, you have a newborn. You have a toddler. You nourish those girls. Courtney nourishes those babies.
100%.
They have a mama. They have a daddy. They know where they stand in that line. To them, their community is your life. Your lens is their comfort.
Yep.
So I'm not emotionally attached to these children that are coming into the boarding school. They're dirty little savages. They're dirty little, we need to teach them. General Pratt said it in the late 1800s. When he conceived the idea of the boarding schools, and I don't know if First Nations over in Canada came first, because Canada, you know, they have a boarding school era just like us. First Nations, they're maybe borders, but we're family. And they've gone through this same as what we've gone through in America historically. And Richard Pratt's idea was, let's kill the Indian, but save the man. Let's use this body and wipe it of every level of identity it is, whether it's culture, whether it's his or her hair, their language, how they respond to being ill, how they seek out guidance, spiritual guidance, existing in a world of being who you are based off what you know, and you're punished for it every day. Okay? You're punished for it. Unless you adopt these beliefs and the way of life of what's being forced upon you. So then you graduate, you leave. Chances are you're going to go back to your home community. So if you live in a tribal area and you're going back to your tribal community, you may not no longer identify with that community. You may get off at that bus stop or that train stop and have your parents waiting for you and not even recognize and let them walk right past you, because you don't no longer know what your aging mother or father looks like. I heard an elder share that. I heard in another podcast over from Canada, when the inquiries over in Canada, they were looking into what happened in the residential schools over there. There's just so many impacts. And then you go home, you're trying to reconnect. And if you don't have the resources to learn how to cope, and you don't have the resources because you were never taught how to process such trauma. And we know today what we didn't know then. Trauma rewrites itself in our DNA. Trauma rewires our brain to respond. And so you may have this seemingly healthy person re-entering your community, but they no longer identify with their culture. They no longer identify with tradition. They don't know how to even use our sacred medicines anymore. They may not know. They may be afraid to ask. They may be so ashamed of themselves because what did they end up doing to survive? And then you come home and then you marry and you have a husband or a wife and you have children and they go into the boarding system too. And we become disenfranchised, we become desensitized, and it becomes a way of life. And generationally, when we were stripped of opportunity to heal, because on top of that, we couldn't even openly practice our religion or our culture, as I like to call it, our traditions, until 1978, till the Freedom of American Indian Religious Act. And so it wasn't even until the 70s we could even openly seek out how to traditionally heal ourselves. What does that look like in an open society? But that was at the grace of our United States government. Just like them ending the boarding school era, just like them ending the swoops, or in the 50s where you could have a Native child in an orphanage and then send them off to anywhere for $10 American cash. I mean, there's that factor. And then you have your environmental factor. And then you have what's your family life like, and who survived what before you, and how did that impact and how they nourished you, and how did that impact how they love you, and how they express their love for you? How does that impact them waking up every day and getting you and telling you you're capable of everything? No, we were taught to survive. We were taught not to speak unless it's spoken to. We were taught not to engage mainstream because we'll be messed with. We were told we were less than. We were told we were savage. We were told we were filthy. We were told we were inhabitant. We were told all these things. And we had this huge system that we were defenseless against come in and for centuries browbeat us. We're martyrs to the U.S. government. That's my personal opinion. I'm not representing anyone. And so with that, and with going back to Rashawn, I am aware of some bans culturally discouraged for a few reasons, right? Do you want to really be here on social media on a Sunday night talking about PTSD and suicide? They're the icky little insidious crevices of our society. No, but we have to talk about it because it's impacting us at rates higher than we've ever seen before, right? And so do I want to sit here and talk about the ugly truth of what I lived through on my res, or the crimes perpetrated against me, or those who I know have died from alcoholism or suicide from my community? Do I want to talk about the kids who are caught perpetrating them against other kids because they were sexually assaulted and that no one came in to save those babies? And then, let's be honest, it feels good. And then they act out because no one's intervening. And so you live with that shame when you come of reason. And then you hope that it doesn't continue, that doesn't bleed in to who you are as a parent or an auntie or who you are in your community. And so you have those factors. And then we have the high rates of addiction. And yeah, we have professionals we're seeing a high rise with a lot of Indigenous rising with our women and men going and getting their law degrees. They're showing up and they're they're decolonizing spaces. They are mainstream law enforcement. They are tribal law enforcement. They are doctors. They are judges. But realistically, we've had a lot of people come into tribal communities and make a lot of money to treat us, to tell us that, you know what, you are savage. And this is, I sought out mental health in the early 2010s. I was going through, I'm a single mom. I was going through it really tough with an ex who was abusive. My oldest son who is on the spectrum for autism, and I went and sought out therapy. And I was stressed, and I went to my tribal center.
Now, with that being said,
hold on, you got to hear this.
Okay. All right, I'll stop.
I was seeking out help for the PTSD in my own life, the trauma in my own life, and trying to raise these kids and trying to heal myself so my isms don't bleed into my own children. And my oldest son at the time, we were talking, I was looking into Social Security for his disability to help compensate because he couldn't physically always stay in the classroom, and then I would have to leave work and whatever. I was looking for that assistance to help at that time. And I had a therapist tell me, who is not tribal, who doesn't understand tribal communities, the trauma, but on top of the ugly that we have some of the best as well. She said, you know what? You're just another res girl trying to live off the system. I was working full time, raising 2 kids, not getting any form of welfare. And that's what she reduced me to in 5 minutes. Okay? So why did I not go back to therapy for a few years in my own goddamn tribal community? And then when I complained about it, the alternative was that I was either going to be referred to an outside non-tribal program for mental health, or I can see the director of the program. And I told that director, I said, I'll work with you because I am a tribal member and you two are not, and I am entitled to this. And not to play that entitlement tribal member, that I know if there are natives watching, they understand tribal politics. But I felt so disgusting of myself, and I had to learn how to advocate for myself and my children. And that happened to me. So I didn't go back. I refused to go back. But I've sought out mental health elsewhere, okay? Because I've come to accept that I need that. I've sought out mental health treatment elsewhere. I will go to therapy. I will, if I need to, you know what I mean? I'm okay with that today and the stigmas that come with that. But in 2011, when you're afraid you're going to lose everything you're working for, and you have a son that you need to compensate financially for, and then you're dealing with an abuser that you're not sure is going to use DV by proxy in the court system, because I was going through 13 different court cases in 2 different jurisdictions at this time, in tribal court and state court. And he came from a tribe that provided financial compensation per capita. And with that being said, he had a lot more resources to take my ass to court. So I had all of these different factors going on. And then I have the shit of my own trauma from my own childhood coming in. I'm trying to stop certain behaviors that I learned through my own lack of knowing how to cope. And I have a mental health professional reducing me to welfare fraud. So think what our men go through.
No,
Think about our men who...
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying, like, I'm only speaking from experience, but think of, I've been very fortunate in my own life to have people support me, and like, I grew up talking, so I always knew what depression was. I knew what alcoholism was via living through it as a child, and then my parents getting sober later on in life. And I knew what these things were because people, even though my parents were surviving from their own isms and their own parents and their own generational traumas, the one thing they gave us were words. They taught us how to speak. They taught us how to speak up for ourselves. They put words to feelings so we could process. Good, bad, or indifferent, I'm grateful for that. But we have those who aren't supported in that way because they don't know what that looks like. Because it's not okay in some places. What if your father or mother or auntie or uncle were hurting you sexually, physically, emotionally, and you go and you tell someone, whether a professional or a family member, but nothing's done? We are invisible on tribal land. We're a BuzzFeed because we've had enough. We have mainstream coming on and saying, oh, high epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Dude, that's been going on since 1492. We're sick of it. But we don't have mainstream supporting us. And I am not reducing or taking away from anybody who's experienced trauma. But when it's only white children who are being plastered over the media when they go missing, and I'm not taking away from any children, but we have brown boys and brown girls, or we have poor folk, and it's not, and our women are dying, our girls, our babies, these girls are as young as 11, being taken, running away. They run away and then they find because they're young and because they never had opportunity and because a man or a woman giving them attention and resources is glitz and glamour for the first time, they can't see the pitfalls, and we're hunted. I'm not. No one would know I'm Native. I come across as white. I do not present as a woman of color. That is okay. But I have girls that I grew up with who have been impacted by the MMIW. We had a girl from the area who lived so I live in the Bemidji area between Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota. And so she was from the area. Her ties were in Minnesota. She was back living in Minnesota. And her partner killed her. And the res she lived on, she wasn't living on that res. She was living on a neighboring res, her partner's res. Law enforcement didn't show up. They had family from Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota show up to this res, and this girl's brother found her. Okay? Law enforcement didn't respond. BIA didn't respond. The feds aren't responding because on top of that, Minnesota, with the exception of one or maybe two tribes, is a public law 280 state. So this project in the 50s through the United States government took some of, I think it's like California, Texas, Wisconsin, I know I'm missing a few others, decided to start this project, and they called it Public Law 280. So we know that tribes are dependent on the federal U.S. Attorney's Office to come in and prosecute major crimes via the Major Crimes Act of the 1800s. What happens is you have people saying, no, like, we know who she is. We know she's a drunk. We know she's going to go back to her boyfriend. We're not going to respond, right?
Wow.
So you get that. And Justin, I'm sure you've seen it. Like, oh, I got to deal with so-and-so, that shithead, and they're not harmful, but maybe they just need, I mean, I don't know how you police, but I'm sure there are those you're more familiar with than others, right?
100%.
So on tribal land, when something like that happens, typically we would call in like BIA or the feds on top of tribal, city, and whatever neighboring police unit we have like contracts with or MOUs. Public Law 280 states refer back to the state system. So jurisdictional systems, welfare systems, whatever. And PL 280 states don't even have it as fair as states dependent on the U.S. Attorney's Office to come in, the federal government. So that's a factor, okay? Isolation from mainstream. We have a lot of tribes that are isolated in the backwoods from any type of neighboring city. We have tribes that are go over 2-3 different various states, and they may only have 15 tribal law enforcement to cover that huge span. We have Pine Ridge is a good example of the they've been disenfranchised out there, and they've some areas, and I know in Dene and Lake Hopi areas, some communities don't even have running water. We have elders living in like shacks. We for a long time here in my community, until we were getting USDA grants and all these things, we didn't have running water, right? Like we didn't have paved roads. So there's all these. I wish it was as simple, Justin and Gary, as saying it's one issue, it's two issue, oh, it's three, and this is how they all intersect. But historically, we have been invisible since day one. No one wants to hear the reality of the third world countries in their own country here in America. No one wants to know that they are playing a part of this beautiful land of the free system that's not free to everybody. And I said this to you guys earlier in private conversation. I appreciate my constitutional rights. But I legally, as a Native, first off, as a woman, couldn't even vote till 100 years ago. But if we're looking at Native Americans or Blacks, let's look at those histories. I mean, we have been chipped away from day one to be on an unequal playing field. It's not 50-50. It's, oh God, this thing. It's not like a 50-50. It's like a 10-90. And then the emerging trend right now, going back to MMIW and all these other forms, is society is, thankfully, we're getting visibility for the wrong reasons. Our girls are fucking dying, excuse my language. Our men are killing themselves. We have the highest rates of PTSD in children. Native Americans only represent 2% of the whole nation, okay? And we have the highest rates of victimization, of suicide, of PTSD, of addiction, and all of these isms that are killing us as a whole. So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. It's not one solution, two solutions. It's hard. It's hard. We have been told we were lesser than, incapable of, wrong, because we have different beliefs than others, you know?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, with all that being said, like, it's kind of like drinking water through a fire hose, what you just said. And,
Yeah, right?
you know, that's fine, but the women, like, if the men can't seek that help, what do the women do? Like, they just kind of sit back, right? Like, that's what it seems like.
So no, we are often surviving a lot.
Okay.
So Native American women are the highest rate of both domestic and sexual assault, okay?
And yeah.
Victims of in America compared to any other race. Again, I want to go back and draw back to any mainstream viewers. Native American, as a whole within the United States, our population is only 2%. We are like one of the least represented populations within the U.S., but we have the highest rates of suicide, of PTSD, of sexual assault, of molestation, of exploitation, of murder, of domestic violence. You know, Native Americans are also second to blacks in the United States to being killed unlawfully by law enforcement.
But we
based
don't
off a
hear about the
2017
Native
study.
Americans. We don't, you know,
No. And I'm not taking away from any other demographic, any other race, because you know
Sure.
what? Unless you were a poised white person in the United States, you had it hard. I mean, I think we can all agree to that. And people don't realize that 2020, this is still going on. But our systems are not set up to respond. Our systems are overcrowded. We're also either this top three, I don't know in which of the top three, but we also represent huge overflow in the national prison systems, both federally and state or private. So, you know, why is that?
No, I don't know. Like, it's
We've been disenfranchised our whole existence since 1492. I know people may push back on that statement. I know people may not understand. I know a trigger word for Justin is the word privilege, but that little snowflake. I love you though. I know that. I know that all of these factors, and then you have family factors, and you have cultural factors, and you have environmental, and you have resources or lack of resources. But I found an interesting statistic.
Go ahead.
What's up?
So
well, I want to touch back on the suicide.
Okay, I do too. So, but also, like, what brought this to light for me was when I went.
Hold on, one of our viewers. Yes, Courtney, and I'll touch on that.
One of my
good question
reasons for, and I guess I'm guilty of not thinking about this before, is because, you know, this whole podcast is because of my buddy Desmond Hill. And when I went to bury him, right, we went to Window Rock, Arizona. Yeah, that's what it was. I literally buried him for an hour and a half because they didn't have a backhoe. Like, and I didn't realize how just secluded the natives were at this point, and
Yeah.
it's so sad. And I've been around the world multiple times. I've been to many third world countries, and I mean, I don't even know if there's a fourth world country because I've been there, I'm sure. But seeing this in our own like backyard, that's what kind of got me thinking. I was like, what is happening? And it just struck a nerve with me. And because
Yeah.
Hill and his family and everyone, when I went to, and it sucks to meet his family in this way. When I went to bury him, it just hit. It's like a slap in the face. I'm like, what the fuck? This guy was willing to put his life on the line for me and all the other cougars in a heartbeat. And then I go to where he's living, and it's just, they're living in shacks, and like, I'm not okay with that, and
are you, first and foremost, Justin, did you seek out any type of guidance or okay from his family to share his story on such the starting point of for you and Gary to have this podcast? Did you seek out that?
Good.
Oh
yeah,
that's the most respectful.
Yeah, no, we reached out 100%, and we know that there's going to be some, they won't agree with a lot of things that we talk about, but they know that this is for Hill, and they're okay with that. And I've talked to very close, family members of his, but what I'm getting at is when we went to his funeral, we had, hell, I don't know, 6 or 7 cougars that were there, and we were honorary guests because Hill spoke so highly of us. You know what I mean? And to see how he was living, and like, I just was not okay with that. And then that's why, like, the whole thing is, did he have the resources? Did he not know how to reach out for the resources? Like, so it kind of struck a chord with me. And
right.
So,
and I mean, these are questions that I really personally cannot answer because I don't.
No, absolutely.
I didn't know him. I don't know those experiences, and I don't want to take away from his honor by any means.
Sure.
But it does. For those watching who care, I don't even know who's watching.
I think everyone who's watching
Justin and I are actually first cousins, and so that's the connection here. And Justin and I come from similar backgrounds, but we are also Cherokee Native. But our family, I find very fascinating, is at least the last 2 generations, so my generation along with Justin's and then the one before us, we have no information. We don't know how to connect back to our ancestral land. We don't know how to connect back to our people on that end, but it's celebrated amongst our family. We have those who speak fluent, what up, Thomas? Cherokee. We have those who honor and believe our medicines. It's beautiful. But they're grasping at straws, right? Like, our family's grasping at straws. And I'm not saying this to offend any of our relatives, to maintain some form of sustenance and connection to their cultural and their inherent identity that they're striving for. I was fortunate to move from the hood to my ancestral lands up here to Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and grow up and flourish in my tribal community. Not everyone gets that.
Yeah.
No, I didn't get all my teachings. I was a jingle dress dancer for a hot minute as a young girl, and I was too white for some people, so I just got really scared and frigid and intimidated and didn't know how to like listen to my true self at 12 years old. And then I went down a really fun path for about 10 years after that. But I was fortunate to come back around, but I had people in my life who made it safe for me to talk about depression. I made it. I had people in my life you know what I mean, who supported that. I had a community that I was just lucky with a lot of the responses. Yes, I had that shitty one with me in my experience in my community, but I think I'm fortunate that I grew up in a time where we're fighting to destigmatize a lot of these things. But again, we're talking about there's just so many outside factors. And then I have pressures as a woman. I have pressures as a as a Native woman. I have pressures as a fair-skinned Native woman. I have pressures as a mother. I have societal pressures as a professional. You men have your own set of pressures that differ from mine, but also parallel and probably intersect and that are similar. So, Justin, Gary, think about that. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 2 years ago, would you guys have been comfortable seeking out, hey, something doesn't feel right with it. I feel broken on a certain level. I know there's help out there. I'm going to go utilize that rope, pull myself up, and get better. At one point in your life, would that have been easy for you?
No, absolutely not.
No, I don't think so. I mean, the only reason, I think the only reason that I ever even talked to anybody or even had any kind of professional help on any level was because I didn't realize there was a problem and people around me did. And they, they're the ones that pushed it. Me personally, I looked at it as there's nothing wrong with me. It's them. They're pissing me off, so it's their problem, not me.
Yeah.
But I never would have went on my own. I mean, because in my mind, I was fine. It was everybody else that had the problem.
Sure.
My mind, they still have the problem. No, I'm kidding. But no, it's true. It's so regardless of that, like external things, it kind of, and I'm posing that. Okay, I need to gather myself. I pose that question to you guys because of obviously I'm female, you guys are men. We have different experiences. What was it like for you to hit a breaking point and saying enough's enough? So fortunately, and I'm very honored to be sitting here chatting with you men, you guys found that point. But did you also have outside support? Someone else spotted it in you before you spotted it in yourself. Justin, I personally know you have a really tough as nails wife who doesn't put up with much. So I'm sure she's
Yep.
And that's a nod to your wife. I love her. She is a saint. But she has tough skin. And so did Hill have those supports? I'm sure he did. I'm sure he had this family. But I want to go back to PTSD. Okay. I have a 10-year-old child. Both my sons are Native, enrolled citizens, and one's in a different tribe than my own. But I have a beautiful, beautiful 10-year-old boy. He just has a beautiful spirit. His name's Eagle Boy, who flies alone. He is a drummer. He practices in our tradition. I'm blessed. I'm very blessed for my children, and they represent so much. But my youngest son was exposed to violence, family violence, not in my home, but his father's home, and it impacted him. And he was told, if you tell your mom, you won't be able to have the benefit, when you're 5, 6 years old, what it does to you, you won't have the benefit of going on family vacation, or you won't see your younger brothers or sisters, or your mom's going to keep you from our family. Like, my 6-year-old internalized this for 6 months before I knew what was going on. And once I found out what was going on, it turned into a multi-jurisdictional case. Tribal PS was involved. I was my own son's foster parent. It wasn't even my tribal community, but his tribe's amazing, beautiful. I love them for all of their support and advocacy to protect those children. There were 6 Native children in this case, my son being included, and I'll speak to his story. That all came out when my son was 6 and just turning 7. At 7.5, he was diagnosed with PTSD. My son still ticks. If I raise my voice, because it's just a natural reaction, that's how he learned to cope to the violence he was exposed to. So he'll still do this when he's nervous if I'm correcting him and he thinks he's in deep trouble. I do not hit my children, so it's not a fear of that. It's like the shame, like he already has this body response and this mental response he doesn't get to control. He hears someone yells, he's in an upright position because of the way that trauma that he experienced impacted his life. Okay, my son became the gatekeeper to a very unhealthy man. But to have this little boy at this time be diagnosed with PTSD, and he's never seen war. He was never physically beaten at my expense. It broke my heart. This is our 7th generation, and it's 2020, and I still couldn't stop my son from being impacted by the isms in our communities.
Wow.
That hurt. Yeah. So let's look at that. And then my son will have a journey to walk that we will separate as mother and child at some point. Both of my sons and I will separate as mother and child. They'll go on and live their own lives. They'll go on and learn how to cope and heal their own isms. But I'll be here to support them. But my only hope is that I got to my son in time. Because on top of that, he's genetically predispositioned to be an alcoholic because both Dad and I are alcoholics. I believe, I know I'm still sober. I do not drink alcohol. So there's all these isms that are playing. And I don't know which luck of the draw yet that my son got genetically. And how did the trauma that I experienced that rewired my brain and imprinted itself and changed my DNA, what did he inherit from that? So we have this whole chemical factor that it's a luck of a draw, and no one gets to control that. There's medicine to respond. There's genetic testing today that will tell you, hey, maybe you've been on Wellbutrin for the last 7 years, but it doesn't work. This is what will work for your body type and your genetic type. We have all of these advances today, but even I struggle. I don't want to go take that genetic test. I don't want to, and I have to reflect what's holding me back. But by the time that I separate from mother and child, and I'm no longer, the one with 1 foot ahead of my children, and now we're either going to be on an equal or just a different path, I want my sons to be prepared to nurture themselves, to nurture their partners, family if they choose to have family. But does everyone have that support? Does everyone have, when that's all you know, and that's normal, and every house in your community is the same, and drinking and drugging or neglect or abuse, and you've never left the res?
Yeah.
And that's your normal? What are you going to bounce that idea off of? Like, I have you two to bounce ideas off of right now, but if that's all you know and you don't know that it's good or bad, that this is just your life and this is as good as it's going to get.
It's like a dead end.
Who's going to? Yes. And that's not just tribal communities. I mean, suicide is amongst youth too. I mean, there's a whole rise going on, but there's so many different factors of assimilation, and there's so many different factors of coping and healing. And so, yeah, we have Western medicine, and I'm grateful for Western medicine, do not get me wrong, but I am grateful that I have access to traditional healing, that I can go see healers, I can go see Midewans out of the Midewan, I can go see a modern doctor if I want to, but when I sit and speak with the healer, it intimidates me, because on the spiritual, I can't articulate the experiences I've had, but there's a huge truth to it. And it's not just going to see someone to make you feel better. There's a whole level of spiritualism of yourself that you're giving. There's a whole level of honor and truth. There's a whole level of tradition that goes into this. And so if I'm going to go into ceremony, I can't, I have to refrain from any mind altering substances. If I'm going to go drum, which women traditionally don't drum, we have our hand drums. We gifted, from the men the drum, but typically women have hand drums versus our big round drum. But say I'm going to go sing or I'm going to go dance in an arena or do anything, I have to be free, right, of those substances. And that's intimidating for a lot of people. How did you cope? How did you cope before you guys broke free and sought help for yourselves? What resources do you have to help alleviate that mental turmoil and trying to rationalize what's in front of you and what your environment is and why am I feeling like this and why am I not good enough, or when will my life change? I mean, I've been into some pretty low spots in my own life and I've asked these questions. Thankfully I'm here today, but we're not making it out alive. Our men are under attack. Our Native women are under attack. The future of our youth is under attack. If you want to go back and look at, I love Greta, the climate activist. I'm not even going to touch that stuff, but I'm just saying what she represents as a youth. But let's go back to Standing Rock a few years ago.
Yeah, I remember that. The water
up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to know how that whole movement began?
Well, before we get into that, I have a question. I'm going to circle back to what my wife said. Is why do you think like everything's so underreported, like in the Native community? Like, why is like the domestic violence? Why is that so under? Is it shame? Like, do people not like? Why is everything so underreported? The Native community, like, that's insane to me.
Well, I don't know if her statement as a whole is huge. I kind of do want to circle back to missing and murdered, because a lot of our missing and murdered women a lot of tribal members actually live off reserve, right? Due to land displacement, loss of ancestral lands, no place to go, or if they left, for all of these different reasons, most Native Americans live in urban settings versus their tribal communities. So when we're looking at response to victimized crime that are being perpetrated against Native women, we are getting mainstream law enforcement officials not reporting. They'll say, oh, they're Caucasian or unknown. They won't label them as Native American. They don't think it's important, but it is, because it tracks our reality of us as being hunted. I live in the Great Lakes region. We have ships importing and exporting all the time. These channels have been here long before any of us walked this earth. So this missing and murdered has been going on since day one. This is a reality that we've been responding to since this is not new to our tribal communities. But when we're in a mainstream setting and they're saying, oh, they're Native, or let's look at the Twin Cities. Let's look at St. Paul and Minneapolis.
We can go round and round, but why is it underreported, do you think?
No, but listen to this. Why is it underreport? They simply don't care. Or, you know what, she's from the res, or she just left the res, or she's Native. And that is the mindset of a lot of officials. Again, I'm not making a one-size-fits-all statement here, because I know that's not all law enforcement. I know that's not all systems. But we are looking at high rates of trafficking. We're looking at high rates of violence. And the lack of correct stats is because, A, people don't want to go and get the correct information. Numbers are likely higher. The Department of Justice, National Institute of Justice, updated the DOJ stats of violence perpetrated against Native men and women, both on and off res. And as a whole, more than 1 in 2 will be sexually assaulted or physically abused in their lifetime. It's like higher than 56. It's like 54.5 for sexual or DV, and then flip it, it's like 55.5 for sexual. I go and work with tribal youth, and I have to talk about the reality of healthy relationships and how do we prevent dating violence. And I have to look these girls in the eye when they ask me a hard question and say, just because you were born with a vagina and you're Native American 2 out of 4 of you girls sitting on the couch in front of me right now will be physically harmed or sexually assaulted in her lifetime. That's our reality. There's jurisdictional
I have a
issues.
question.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Now, we're talking about disappearances and murders and stuff like that.
Yes.
Now, from what I'm understanding, you have the laws of the land, but you also have native laws, correct?
Yes. So, okay. Each tribe, each federally recognized tribe in the United States is its
And the
own
reason why I'm
sovereign.
asking this, is because you say that they look at it and say, well, she just got off the res or she went,
Yeah.
whatever. Now, I know, like, if I go missing, okay, people know my social security number, people know my ID, like there's proper documentation of me being a person.
Yeah.
So do you feel that a lot of this, them just saying, well, they just got off the res or whatever, not looking into it, do you feel like it's improper documentation? They don't know what they're looking for, or they just push it under the rug?
I think there are multiple factors. Statistically speaking, going back to Courtney, the proof is in the stats. I mean, these are highly educated, third party to the government coming in, and their findings are, okay, here's the thing. We have our jurisdictional issues on tribal land. We have stereotypes, which we spoke at length about earlier. People assume because I'm white with blonde hair and I paid for the streaks, if anyone cares, that I'm not native, or that I didn't have the same cultural experience, or that I don't belong to my community. And so if something were to happen to me, I would probably get a higher response than a good friend of mine who I grew up with, who looks native. People called her Pocahontas. She has the most beautiful hair. You don't go and touch a native person's hair. 1, that's medicine. 2, there's valid reasons why we grow our hair. It's ceremonial. You know what I mean? That shit's sacred. Excuse my language in that, and I'm not trying to offend anyone.
Oh, I'd say fuck.
She was a little girl, and adults would come and play with it, and all of this. So we have these, like, we've been kind of exoticized, if that's even a word. We've been kind of embellished to be something more than actual human beings who are functioning in real day-to-day life. We're kind of like mythical creatures. And so when society learns...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I rant, so go on.
No, you do rant. I know that.
But yes, you do. But the thing is, like, okay, you're telling me you as a white woman on this reservation, and got your BMI card, you're all, you're supposed to be there, right? Now, growing up as the white blonde-headed kid, do you feel alienated by the tribe by any way, or do you feel alienated by, like, society?
No, I did. So what you're speaking of is called lateral violence, and
oh shit.
That's a whole other.
I'm speaking what?
That's
I'm
a whole other.
What?
So what you're talking about, you're asking me about my experience being a seemingly white woman, white girl growing up in my tribal community.
Right.
Okay. And have I faced backlash or support in mainstream or tribal white? So I didn't understand historical, like I didn't know my own history yet when I was 10, 11, 12.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I felt shameful or like inadequate or less than because I didn't appear as native as others, that messed with me, and I stepped away for a while. And then I had my oldest son when I was in my teens, and I felt and I was raised with religion as well, so I felt, okay, I need to get my child baptized and I need to bring him around our culture. Well, then I was also a teenager. I did minimal, but I partied and I had my own issues and ultimately found sobriety and all this other things. And then I had my second son, and I knew odds were I was going to have a brown boy. I knew that both his father and I felt it was important that he was going to be exposed either through his community or jointly between both of our communities, because we were together at this time, and raised traditionally, but also with Catholicism in his life, because his father and I both just come from the same religious, spiritual background and being tribal. So when I had William, I just felt, all right, Hallie Kathleen, you got to kind of work through some resentments, accept some shit, and do the right thing for your son. Because I was older, I was more comfortable, and my son, too many people fought for my son and my right and their rights to freely participate in society as a Native American. And so I just felt I owed it to both my children at that time. But as I got older, I started understanding lateral violence, which is what a lot of people call reverse racism. But it's lateral violence. It's when amongst your own, there's prejudice, you're putting those down, whatever. So the government and the BIA came in and introduced this idea of blood quantum. So in some bands, in some tribes, if a woman married a non-native, they were distinguished from their tribe back in the day. So they would no longer be on paper as a native, like census roll. They were just disbarred from their disenrolled or whatever from their communities. The BIA also came in and said, okay, you're full-blooded, but your mom's a Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, and let's say your father's from one of the Pokagon bands. Either you're Ojibwe or you're Pokagon band, Potawatomi. And so say that I chose Potawatomi, they would say Hallie McKelvey is 50% Potawatomi, and that's it. So there goes my full, even though I'm a full-blooded Native. So say that on paper I'm technically half, and then I go and have children with a non-native partner. Well, then my kids go from being half-blood to really quarter-blood, and then by the time that they have children, their children are an eighth. And then if you live in a tribe, that minimum blood quantum is a quarter blood. And for, again, we are talking about sovereign nations. I am not disputing why tribes put that in there, but I know how that practice came to be. And again, it was another form to wipe us out. They were trying to exterminate us by generationally wiping us out. So I went from being full-blooded to half-blooded and then, the more watered down you got, you couldn't claim ties to your tribal community if they had a blood quantum status. So again, that's another smart tactic that they used. And so a lot of bands and tribes adopted the quarter blood quantum requirement. And it just became, I'm better than, or we have people who assume I'm trying to assimilate my own culture. Like I have some really beautiful peyote stitch earrings. They're packed because I'm going on a trip. I have hand beaded bracelets and necklaces, and people assume I'm buying native relics off like eBay or some Etsy. And it's like, no, I actually bought these from someone in my community, or I bought this from their son, and
Okay.
it's assumptions. But
Now,
yes,
we're talking about like kids and their kids,
sorry.
but you said that you had a kid with a man from another tribe,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Or another. Okay. Now that child, does he become a quarter from you and a half from his father, or how does that work?
No, well, actually, so the tribe that my son is my youngest is enrolled in is a blood quantum tribe. And how that worked was that so I'm an enrolled citizen of my tribe because I can go back to the Durant census rolls of the 1800s and say, hey, my grandma's great aunt is on, Susan LaPlante from Detour Village, now living on Mackinac Island at this time in Michigan, is from the Ottawa Chippewa Band. That got me enrolled with my tribe. So my son's tribe also has rolls, and I had the birth certificate and all this stuff to prove that his father, who was, his father, they took the blood quantum from his father, and then my tribe did a blood quantum statement for me, and then they used that to calculate. And so actually on paper, that's why my son's, because his father's 3/4 Native and a quarter French. So he's not like a clean half. I myself, I'm not half. But so that actually brought up my son's blood quantum on paper. And then if he were to go reproduce, and same thing, right? But that's just how this one sovereign government chooses to operate their enrollment process. So there are other tribes who adopt. So earlier you posed a question about like land of, like how tribes have their own laws and rules of the land. So we have our own functioning body of government. Typically, it's a chief or a tribal chairperson, tribal chairwoman, however they, Ogama, however they choose to name that position. And then you also have your body of council that are elected. And so some tribes have like a Western model of our United States government system, but then they also have like their traditional board of directors as well. So then, tradition's always at the forefront and our guiding factor. And so there's these, no one tribe's the same, but we all have laws. Oftentimes they're called tribal code, and oftentimes they're attached to tribal constitutions. And so we base our laws off federal, but we don't have to like follow state. We don't have to set precedent off state or any other municipality besides the feds. So yeah, each 570 plus federally recognized tribes have their own government, their own judicial system, their own child welfare system, their own medical response, their own education. I can't speak for them all.
It's kind of hard to keep up with. I mean,
It is.
if everybody has something different, it seems like it's going to be like a nightmare, like a public nightmare to keep up with what all the rules are.
Well, no,
now,
it's not.
I want to go back.
It's not that hard, but yeah, for those
who for you it's not.
Don't know. Yes.
Because you're like part genius or something.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Yeah.
And
now, okay, I want to go back to something we talked about before we went live. I have it on my little notes here from before.
Not the train, right?
You mentioned, huh?
Not the train. We're not talking about the trains.
No, not the train.
Okay.
No, not the choo-choo train. Now, you told me a scenario where, like, say, a non-tribal member came onto the reservation and sexually assaulted a woman, or if it's a woman assaulting a man, whatever. Yeah. Like, kind of tell our viewers what you were telling me, because to me that seems really not right.
No, it's not. Let's get into that. So we have some jurisdictional issues. And because I had just hit off every stereotype in life, I myself have been caught up in a 3 jurisdictional case from the same crime with 3 different results. I referred to it earlier with my son and the violence that he witnessed and experienced in his other parents' home. So, yes, through a series of Supreme Court cases and acts of Congress, we are jurisdictionally screwed. We got the short end of the stick there. So first off, there's something called like the General Crimes Act, which turned out to end up being, which is in action today, the Major Crimes Act of the late 1800s. It was a Supreme Court decision, I believe, but ultimately the feds came in and said, look, tribes, there was a case between Spotted Crow and Spotted Tail and Crow Dog. I'm tired, so I'm sorry, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful. One was chief, one was sub-chief, and I am paraphrasing the story, so I'm not trying to offend any historical fact checkers here, but I am going to be accurate with the context. I just have the parties mixed up. One of the sub chief killed the chief of the tribe, and the family of the victim and the family of the perpetrator and the tribe came together, and the family wanted some livestock. Of course, I mean, their loved one was a lot more, but this is how they chose, and it was victim satisfaction. The family wanted livestock, and a few other, like resources, and then that was squared away. And again, I'm paraphrasing in case anyone's on here who actually knows the story verbatim. And the feds came in, the government came in and said, no, this can't happen. Like, he killed, Spotted Tail or Crow Dog, and this isn't how you deal with it. And we have, these people are inadequate to respond to crimes in their community or whatever. That's not the case. That's how we chose. That was restorative justice. You put the victims at a place to come to peace and decide what's going to happen to the perpetrator. That is called restorative justice. We need more of that in all of our systems, tribal or non, today. The Major Crimes Act said, okay, if you are on tribal land, tribal or non-tribal, native or non-native, and you commit murder, grave bodily injury, rape, and essentially it speaks for itself, a major crime, the feds will come in and prosecute. So, I mean, I can go over like the marshal a bunch. So I'm going to go fast forward to 1978, where Mr. Oliphant sued the Suquamish tribe out of Washington, and, well, not sued, but appealed their jurisdiction, their sovereignty, and said, yes, I committed a crime on tribal land, but I'm a guest in this country. Like, I'm a guest to this government. They're their own sovereign government, because the United States government had already established in case law and reference their relationship with the tribes in the U.S. It's called Indian country. That's a legal definition. Okay. So this gentleman's saying, like, I'm not a citizen of Indian country. So he appealed it, went through, circuit court, all these things, goes to the Supreme Court, court of the law. And they stated tribes no longer can utilize their inherent sovereignty to exercise jurisdiction over non-tribal perpetrators. So in 1978, that began. And so essentially a non-tribal perpetrator can come onto tribal land and offend, whether it's sexual assault, whether it's rape, any of the major crimes. And if the tribe does not have the inherent right to offend a perpetrator who is causing havoc and crime on tribal land within their jurisdiction, that causes some problems. So it desensitizes non-tribal offenders. People seek out the weak. People seek out the disenfranchised. People seek out loopholes in society. And so you can come and offend, and if the tribe, again, can't arrest them, you refer the case to the, typically a United States Attorney's Office, whatever district you have in your region or where you sit. And if the feds investigate and say, you know what, there's not enough to charge here, they'll decline the case. And now this is not a lie, and this kind of goes back to Courtney's question. They decline, on average, like 76% of all major crimes referred to them from all the tribes in the United States. 76% of major crimes that are reported, because we know a lot of major crimes are actually underreported, like sexual assault, domestic violence, molestation, all this. Yeah. So our government declines them. The tribe doesn't have jurisdictional sovereign right to even arrest them, so they get to walk free. I myself found myself in a federal case where our perpetrator was facing 20 years. He was sentenced to 26 months. He sat 10 months in county and 9 months in federal court. Yeah. So, he got to walk free, but I was still technically I didn't even have jurisdiction over my son. I let him I agreed because I had a state. Okay, you guys, Want to get confused? You want
Oh.
to talk jurisdiction? You want to know why the rates of violence
I
are so
think I'm
high?
there. I think I'm there.
Let's talk. No, you're not, Justin. Let's talk. I love you, buddy.
We have been.
So, no, listen.
I'm just
I
listening.
legitimately
I'm just listening.
I had a state court hearing or case. I had a tribal court child welfare case, and I had a federal criminal jurisdictional case. Okay, and in state court it was family court. So my son's father and I originally had a custody order with the state of Michigan, not tribal court. Tribal court had no jurisdiction to because my son didn't reside on tribal land. He lived here with me, and I don't live on our tribal land. They didn't have the right to intervene on the state's order and say William's going to become a ward of our tribe. So I agreed for my son to be a ward of his tribe. And what they did is they took the babies into CPS care and placed them with their mothers. So I became my son's foster parent for over 24 months. My son's father went to federal prison. His case was wrapped up in 19 months. So for 36 months, this was my life. Okay. And my son's tribe was beautiful. They supported us. They advocated. They protected us. I mean, it was hell. It was tedious. It was humbling. It was embarrassing. It was shameful. I work in this field, and how didn't I notice this was going on? But they protected us. So out of the 3 jurisdictions, my heart will always celebrate my son's tribal court and what they did for us and his siblings and the other mother. And what happened in state court, they gave me full custody, right? They didn't terminate, but they gave me full custody. And then eventually the tribe terminated his father's rights. And then in federal court, after 19 months, he's a truck driver driving across the nation. I'm sure he has to report and wear an anklet, but doesn't mean he's not. So I'm just saying,
No,
why would you report when you have 3 different systems for the same crime
God, that's
and 3
And all
different
this is
very
happening-
results? Yeah.
all this is happening.
I
like,
want to show you guys
right
something. Yeah. Hold on.
holy fuck.
All of this is, I have 2 more of these are from my 3 different jurisdictional court cases. And then I pissed off the U.S. Attorney's office, and they attacked the party of the victim because they screwed up and didn't provide us justice. So I have a U.S. Attorney who wants my head too.
Oh goodness. All right.
Yeah. So I'm just saying. So take your pick. Why? Take your avenue. Take your entrance. All of it.
Feel like
It's not one reason. It's not one. It's all of it.
this is like a
Sorry.
2-part thing.
I don't even think it's top spot. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, we'll
man.
definitely
again,
have her back on.
Yeah. And I do want to reiterate too, I don't represent even my community. This is just my experience. This is my education. This is the reality. I'm sure, I paraphrased a little bit. So, but yeah.
All right. Well, goodness. It's like drinking water through a fire hose. 100%.
I mean, we're a small platform. We're a small platform when you think of how big like news can get and everything else. Like we're very small on the spectrum of getting news out there. Now,
Yeah.
Something like this, it seems like it should be like on Dateline or 60 Minutes or
No, we are
or something.
We are getting visibility. The Violence Against Women Act was up for reauthorization back in 2013. And for the first time since the Oliphant versus Suquamish, tribes had the opportunity to adopt this law, or the special domestic violence criminal jurisdiction law. For sure, I call it the VAWA law. And tribes have to, ensure that they have a fair jury pool. So they have, and if they don't have jurisdiction over non-tribal, how do you get a fair jury pool for tribal or non-tribal defendants? So we have a lot of non-tribal living in housing, and it's become like my tribe said, if you're going to work for us and you're not tribal, or if you're going to live in our housing but you're not tribal, you will agree to be summoned to jury duty. So you have to do that. You have to provide them all the same due processes that you would in state or federal court. You have to pay for the defense. You have to pay for the lodging if they're sentenced to jail. You have to pay for their medical care, those expenses while they're in jail. You have to pay just all these things, and not every tribe financially can afford to do that. And so, yeah, they gave us a crumb and passed the REOF where if tribes, which my tribe did, and I think maybe like between 30 and 40 between across the country have, you adopt the criminal jurisdiction law and meet the criteria to do so, from the United States government. Now you have authorization to arrest a non-tribal offender only in response, and don't cut me off because this may blow your mind, Justin. You can
My mind's
arrest a
been blown
non-tribal
for the last
offender.
fucking 6 hours.
So you can only arrest a non-tribal offender if it relates to domestic violence. However, if there is sexual assault or abuse, if there is child abuse or child molestation, or if there is harm to the first responders, our tribe has no jurisdiction. It's only for
That's fucking insane.
DV, right? So we're still missing our kids who, again, our kids have high rates of PTSD, both from victimization and then being exposed to the high rates of violence and other factors. So we have a REOC coming up, but the House and the Senate just can't make it work. But one version's trying to strip us of what they gave us in 2013 and then some, but then one version's trying to honor, and then you need, it's politics, right? Our women are dying, our kids are being exploited, but yet they're holding on to it for dollars, or they think we're savages. We have the Savannah's Act coming. That's based off the young lady who was pregnant and went to go buy some clothes from a woman off Facebook, and they killed her and took the baby. We have a few other bills coming that are like working to give us more jurisdiction. I will say our administration, though they didn't really seek counsel with communities or the tribe, they didn't culturally honor the process at all, which you should always do engaging, because how my tribe may culturally respond to something, a whole other band across the country may do it differently. Like, we are not one size fits all. They do have, right now, Trump's administration did put together an MMIW like cohort or committee, but again, it wasn't really advised by the experts, like tribal communities and families. You should always honor victims and their stories. So there are pluses and there are minuses, but really our hands are tied. I mean, I can talk about the boarding school all day. I can talk about the jurisdictional stuff all day. I mean, it's so, when I train on these topics, the last one I did on this, it was an 8-hour day.
Oh,
it was an 8-hour training.
I can imagine.
So, I mean, I can't just. I wish I could snapshot it, but I can't, and I'm sorry.
Hey, so I'm not to cut you off, but
I got to pack.
Yeah, I do too. I got to pack my ass to bed. But thank you for talking. I think we got to reconvene, all three of us again, and then keep going. And you offered us a lot of good insight, and I think you went way deeper than we thought, which is a good thing.
It's hard not to. I'm so sorry.
No, you're very intelligent. You're very educated in what you do. So no, don't be sorry about that. I just didn't think that. Holy shit. That I'd get all this information. I'm sitting here writing notes and notes. But holy,
Gary's been doing that a whole lot longer than you, by the way, so quit it. Good job, Gary.
Do what?
The note taking.
Oh, my wife talked me into taking the notes. I think that I can put
Yeah.
everything in here and it doesn't
Same.
work. So let's go ahead
Well,
and end this on a
I'm real bad about like I'll catch certain things, so I'll write it down. That way, if I have a question about it, I can throw it back up later.
Oh, not once was I offended. Not
good. Well, let's go ahead and end this on a good note. And I'm going to take my ass to bed because I'm going to the mountains day after tomorrow. So,
bougie. Good.
Allie, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I have a
Thank you very
feeling
much,
that this is
Allie.
not- It's not going to be the last time we see you. I have a feeling for that.
No,
Well,
I
I
just-
you know,
I want to thank you for your time, and you know,
yeah.
this is a very, very
Informative.
touchy subject, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
It's sensitive, yeah,
It's
but
very informative. It's very, but you know, like I said, we're small, so getting it out there is you know on our viewers, you know, trying to push it and you know get it out there. But I do appreciate you for your time. It's awesome that you took the time to sit down with us and talk with us. We'll see you soon.
yeah.
Let's
Yeah, thank
reconvene.
you. I appreciate it.
I appreciate everything, and to our watchers, our viewers, like, share, repost, go check out the YouTubes. All right, y'all have a good night.
You too. All right.
Bomba P.